Okay, gang, we are on week 11. We are in the second portion of your kind of self-guided exploration of some disease states, and we are currently talking about hyperlipidemia. Just to refresh your memories, last week I had given you information on diabetes, and hyperlipidemia is under the umbrella of diabetes, so we're just going to go into a little bit about what this is. This is not a tremendously long lecture. I'm just kind of throwing you guys a little bit of a bone here because, as I said, the training wheels are off and you guys are now doing kind of a self-directed approach to trying to understand some of these diseases, and we are going to be focusing on prescription quite a bit now. So we're going to kind of shift our gears a little bit and talk about how to prescribe and what we would do with these prescriptions with individuals who are suffering from metabolic complications such as type 2 diabetes as well as hyperlipidemia. So let's get into this. So what is hyperlipidemia? Your textbook if you have edition 4, your textbook kind of took the hyperlipidemia information that was its own chapter in the previous version, and it kind of broke it up into different parts of the textbook. So hyperlipidemia is not in one specific location, but that's okay because I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a lecture here, and I'm going to send you guys some papers that will talk about this as well. And this is, again, we're just kind of building up on our exam number 3 here. We're building towards making that exam. So hyperlipidemia, as you would imagine, hyperlipid basically means that you have abnormally high levels of all or any lipids. You could have not only elevated lipids, but you can also have elevated lipoproteins. So if you don't know what lipids are, you don't know what lipoproteins are, we will talk about those in some great detail momentarily. You can also have elevated tags, which are triacylglycerols, which are triglycerides. So those are another type of lipid that's circulating in the blood. And all of these are associated both independently and synergistically with cardiovascular disease and also acute pancreatitis. And you do not want pancreatitis because when your pancreas goes because of chronic inflammation, well, there goes the first organ that basically initiates all endocrine signaling in the body, right? Because, especially when it comes to metabolism, your pancreas is the first thing that basically interacts with glucose once it comes into the blood, once you eat food with glucose in it. It also regulates glucose control while you are sleeping by secreting something called glucagon, right? So we do not want our pancreas encountering any unnecessary trauma, to say the least. Okay, so hyperlipidemia is an elevation of either lipids, lipoproteins, triacylglycerols, all of these, or just one of these, and we'll talk about each one of these in a bit more detail. So let's talk a little bit about lipid metabolism and how these things work in the body. I'm going to introduce some terms to you. These are things that you have seen before. If you were in my classes previously, you have definitely seen these. But let's just kind of talk a little bit about the orchestration that occurs when you eat dietary lipids. So, of course, cholesterol is one of these lipids that kind of rest under this banner of hyperlipidemia. Your body produces its own cholesterol. So you can see here that the liver synthesizes its own level of cholesterol. And there's a lot of research out on this now that basically says that your own synthesis of cholesterol is enough to maintain normal physiological processes, right? So what does cholesterol do? Well, cholesterol basically is the major component of your lipid bilayer in any cell in the body. Cholesterol helps with the synthesis of hormones. There's cholesterol components that are involved in every hormone that you produce. So essentially they have very important tasks. They're also a component of bile creation. So when you guys break down food and you use bile, cholesterol is a component of bile production. So pretty important things that cholesterol does. Now, when we consume dietary fat and cholesterol, we take it in through the body, and then it goes into the ileum, duodenum, and the different components of the intestines. That fat that you consume gets taken into the small intestines, especially within the lymphocytes or the lymph system, and it's basically packaged in these things called chylomicrons. And chylomicrons are the transporter. We'll just say they're a type of lipoprotein. So they have proteins and they carry lipids, and they carry them from the small intestines, from the lymph system into the circulation, right? So that is how fat gets into the body. It's different than glucose, because glucose uses the hepatic portal vein, where fat has to enter specifically through these chylomicrons. So these chylomicrons, they just package up whether the saturated fats, the monosaturated fats, or I'm sorry, saturated fats, the monounsaturated fats, the polyunsaturated fats, cholesterol, all these things get packaged in these little lipoproteins, and they get spat into the blood. So once they get put into the circulation, these chylomicrons are going to make their way to the liver, and then the liver is going to figure out what to do with the package that has just arrived. And what the liver does with this package is based upon a lot of different factors. One is how much fat is already existing in the tissue. How much fat is the liver already processing? Is the liver storing fat? Is the liver sending out fat to the muscles to be stored there? Is the liver sending out fat to the muscles to be stored there because you're sedentary and the liver doesn't have any more space? Or is the liver sending out fat to the muscles because you're highly active and it wants to store fat in the muscles so that you have a readily available fuel source during exercise? So there's many factors. There's no real easy answer to why the liver does what it does. I'm just giving you some examples. Now, once the chylomicrons make their way to the liver will process the information, which is the lipids, the fats, and the cholesterol, and then it will ship it out. And it will do this within a lipoprotein, which is called very low density lipoproteins, right? So that's what VLDL means. And I will show you why these are called VLDL in a minute. So I'm just kind of trying to organize you here to how this works. So then the liver spits out VLDL into the blood, and then the VLDL will be converted into low density lipoproteins. Okay, so there's an enzyme that kind of helps convert that and basically make these low density lipoproteins, right? So that's these guys here. Now, low density lipoproteins, their whole job is to take the fat that you have eaten, whether it's, again, saturated fat from animals, unsaturated fat from plants and oils, or cholesterol. Cholesterol only comes from animal products. Plants do not produce cholesterol. Even high fatty plants like avocado, there's no cholesterol in there. The LDLs will basically take all of that fat and start distributing it amongst the body. So you can see that it will basically target peripheral tissues such as the muscle and various organs, and it will drop off the cargo. Okay, so all of this stuff here, it's going to want to drop off. So when we start talking about cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis and hypertension and dyslipidemia and hyperlipidemia, the main culprit that is responsible for basically creating obesity and delivering fat from the liver to the muscle and to the adipose tissues, and the adipocytes and the organs is low density lipoproteins. Right? These are the bad guys. These are the ones we always want to try to lower because they're dropping off the cargo. They're not necessarily bad. The individual that is living on a poor diet and has sedentary lifestyle they're making the choice to do that. The LDLs are just the messenger, right? That's all they're doing. They're just dropping off the information. So then we also have these HDLs, which are high-density lipoproteins, and these are the good guys. These are the heroes of the story. These are the guys that are going to pick up circulating cholesterol, or they'll pick up triglycerides from different tissues, and they'll bring them back to the liver to basically be metabolized and to be removed. So the LDLs and the VLDLs, they drop off the nasty stuff, and the HDLs, they pick up the nasty stuff and they get rid of it. So in the state of obesity, in the state of chronic metabolic disorders, in the state of many sort of metabolic diseases, the VLDLs are very high in the blood, the LDLs are very high in the blood, and the HDLs are very low in the blood. And that's generally why we measure the blood to determine what your cholesterol levels are, right? So the VLDLs are in a pathogenic state are elevated. The LDLs in a pathogenic state are elevated, and the HDLs in a pathogenic state are decreased. And there's a lot of speculation out there that says that when we exercise, I'll just draw what can I draw with my finger here? Let's see, does that look anything like a dumbbell? Sure, we'll call that a dumbbell. There's a lot of speculation that when we exercise, that is going to have an impact on these guys here. So when we exercise, there's research that says when we begin to do, and again, it depends on what type of exercise, right? So if you're running, let's draw a picture of a guy running. One hand would be back, the other hand, we'll give him some shoes, right? Okay, so this guy's running. There's a lot of research out there that says that when we do lots of cardiovascular exercise, what happens is, depending on how time and duration and frequency of that exercise, what happens is we start to see a decrease in very low density lipids, a decrease in low density lipoproteins, and an increase in HDL, right? So the high density lipoproteins. So again, exercise is medicine. So these are the players. Now let's talk a little bit about what the LDL, VLDL, HDL, what kind of separates them. And what I want you to pay attention to is this down here: cholesterol, triglycerides, protein, phospholipids. So fat, 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 non-fat, right? Okay, so chylomicron, it's going to be basically composed of fat, triglycerides, and cholesterol. Okay, so you see this here. Look at the green, it's a lot of triglycerides and a lot of cholesterol, right? And the phospholipid, which is very important, right? You see this here, that's the packaging, right? And the packaging basically keeps all that nasty fat inside. And you can see here that the protein ratio of fat to protein is very, very low, right? So this has very low protein expression. So chylomicrons are going to basically leave your small intestines, leave the lymph system, and travel to the liver, and then the liver is going to basically produce VLDL based upon what the chylomicron delivers. All right, so now let's look at the components of VLDL. So you can see how these different lipoproteins, what they're composed of. So if we look at the VLDL, you can see that it has a couple more proteins. You see protein, protein, protein. And when it comes to the kind of lipid world, the more protein it has, the better it is for you, because the more protein it has, the less fat that it has, okay? So you can see here that the VLDL is a lot of triglycerides, look at all the green, and a lot of cholesterol, look at all the yellow, right? And the VLDLs will go to adipose tissue. They'll go to other organs. Let me clean this up. And they can be converted into LDL, which is low density lipoproteins. Now look at the difference between these two, right? LDL is primarily cholesterol. So when we check your blood, we check your cholesterol levels by trying to determine how much LDL is circulating in your blood. So if you have a lot of cholesterol, well, that means you have a lot of LDL that is also in circulation because the body has to put this cholesterol somewhere. So now we could say theoretically that LDL is better than VLDL because it has more of this protein expression. You see all these little hearts here, or they could be kidney beans, whatever you want to call them. But still, the packaging is a lot of cholesterol. Okay, now when we get to HDL, look at this. This is called a high-density lipoprotein because the density of protein is very high compared to these other guys here, right? So, and again, this one is favorable because it's going to pick up all that cholesterol and it's going to bring it back to the liver. Again, when we begin to exercise, I'll draw the arrows just to kind of bring this home. When we are in an obese state, or we're gaining weight, or we're developing obesity, this is elevated. This is elevated in the blood. This is very low in the blood. Now when we begin to exercise, again, depending on how long, how frequently, what the intensity is, this goes down, and this goes up, right? So again, exercise is medicine. We can completely change our blood chemistry profiles just by starting to exercise. And that's really important for the group of people that we're talking about today, which is, again, we're talking about people that have hyperlipidemia or type 2 diabetes because they're under the same banner. That's why last week I gave you diabetes to kind of explore on your own, and this week we're just diving a little deeper. Okay, so I have this information here which basically summarizes exactly what I just said. What are the parts of the lipid story? I told you what the chylomicron is, what it does. I told you what low density lipids are, right? I told you this, that's a typo. Let me fix that so you don't get something weird and you're like, what the heck does that mean? That should be, I don't want to draw anymore. Stop drawing. Ooh, turn that, nope. Draw, okay. This should be carry. And you can see what all these things kind of do, right? I don't need to go over it because I just did it in the last. Oh my God, what is going on here? Okay, that looks pretty, right? So this tells you what all those things do. And this is just a repeat of what I did here and what I did here. Here's more on it. So now, there's something else that happens with these LDLs specifically. So let me clean this up here. LDLs can undergo oxidation. And we're not going to do a lesson on oxidation now. When you get into, if you do your master's program, we'll talk a lot about oxidation. But what happens is that these things can be oxidized. And once they're, I'm just going to put an OX. Once they're oxidized, they basically can cause, they're a major contributor to, I'm just going to put A because I'm not going to spell this all with my finger, atherosclerosis. So these are the guys that they become oxidized and they can lead to the development of plaque formation in the blood. They can lead to the development of thrombosis. So if we have plaque formation, let me just draw this for you guys, right? This is my blood vessel. And if we start to get this plaque formation, which we call atherosclerosis, right? I'm just going to draw that there. Then you can see that the plaque is protruding into the blood vessel. So what happens is all the red blood cells, red blood cell, red blood cell, red blood cell, red blood cell, they're flowing through the blood. And then when they hit this plaque, they begin to form clots here, right? And what these clots are called, right, because all that blood and the pressure is building, it can't get through this very narrow space that's right here, right? It's trying to get through where this plaque is developing right here. This is called thrombosis, and thrombosis is basically a blood clot that happens. And once you have plaque, you have, I'm just going to kind of make this look a little more thrombosis-y, right? So I'm just going to say this is a blood clot here. Once you have a blood clot like this, because it can't get through, then what happens is you start to have an increase in blood pressure. And if you have an increase in blood pressure, I'll just put BP, right? If you have an increase in blood pressure, well, then you're going to have an increase in heart rate, right? Because now your heart has to beat faster. That's an arrow and that says HR. You're going to have an increase in heart rate. And then what happens is you begin to develop something called, I'm just going to put H. It's an H. T for hypertension, right? So this is how these things are all kind of related. So this LDL is like one of the main culprits that is involved in making all of that happen. I'm going to clean that up. LDL, hyperlipidemia, they are strongly associated with the development of atherosclerosis, hypertension, and coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease, right? So kind of the same thing, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And you guys should know what that is because we talked about that earlier in the semester, so you should have an indication of what that issue is. So what I was saying here is that when these things oxidize, they help form atherosclerosis. And basically, this atherogenic cholesterol that is bad for the heart and bad for the blood vessels has both been associated with LDL and VLDL. And it's interesting now because actually research is starting to change. The USDA and the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee and the Human Health Services that are all basically belong to the United States Nutrition Council. They're now retracting everything they've said about cholesterol and LDL for the last 40 years, and they're telling people to go ahead and just eat as many eggs and dairy and yogurt and things that you would like. And the scientific community is just having an absolute fit about it because you can't undo 30, 40 years worth of medical research because the dairy, the egg, and the meat, and the these industries are losing money. So so just be careful how much cholesterol you eat. Now, what are triglycerides? So I told you that, let's go back here. I told you that these triglycerides are also a part of this equation. So triglycerides are basically a type of fat that's also found in your blood. And when you eat food, if you're eating a tremendous amount of calories, and they're calories that you don't need because you're inactive, your body's going to convert that into triglycerides, which is fat, right? And sugar is one of the main culprits involved in triglyceride formation, because if you're eating excessive sugar, there's research out there that says that sugar is going to be converted into fat, which are triglycerides. These things are stored in your fat cells, and then later hormones will release them between meals. So when you're fasting, you'll have triglycerides be released as free fatty acids. And then you can, when you start to have changes in your diet, and you're eating more calories and more sugar and more salt and sodium in processed foods, what begins to happen is you will start to develop very high levels of triglycerides, which is also a part of this hyperlipidemia story that we're telling here. And this leads to, try to say this 5 times, hypertriglyceridemia. All right, so that is another condition that's under this banner. So let's move on to the next one. So now, this is more on the low-density lipid stories. And I already kind of told you this, but let's just kind of go over it anyways. The VLDL and the LDLs, these are the guys that are going to deliver that cholesterol to other parts of the body, and the high-density lipids are going to bring it back. We already talked about that. Just kind of beating a dead horse here. So now let's talk about what are some of the major causes of this hyperlipidemia. And it's kind of the same things that we've been talking about for most of the class. diet, obesity, diabetes, pregnancy. Of course, when you have pregnancy, you have this kind of transient hyperlipidemia, and that has to do with changes in your hormones and also changes in your dietary needs because you're feeding a baby. Hepatitis leads to that, and that would make sense because hepatitis is a liver disease. So if we have the liver that is damaged, then the liver can't properly receive and deliver fats, so there's going to be some issues there. AIDS is another one that occurs. And then when you get into things like hyperthyroidism, anorexia, liver disease, these things are all kind of related as well. But we're focusing on, since this is more of an exercise course than anything, we're focusing on the diet, the obesity, the diabetes. Let's see, we don't have to really talk about the rest of these, but again, it's kind of, in the most part, for most people, it's self-inflicted, but as you start to develop other complications, this occurs as well. So how does it impact the body? If it's not treated, we're going to develop that plaque within your blood vessels. We're going to get that atherosclerosis. This can lead to coronary artery disease in the heart as well. And to prove that, I brought this over here, and you can see that with high levels of triglycerides, high levels of cholesterol, high levels of low-density lipoproteins, and very low-density lipoproteins, we could lead to heart attack, stroke, coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, right? So this is specifically the artery in the heart that can have plaque formation, which can lead to cardiac arrest. It can lead to ischemia, and then microvascular disease. What does that mean? Well, microvascular disease means when we have our capillaries, I'm going to draw just a capillary bed here, right? So this is we'll call this the arterial side. Yep, so let me just kind of draw this here, and we'll call this the venous side. Okay. And you know that our capillaries, let me just draw some of this to make it look like capillaries. We know that our capillaries are the microvascular components, right? That's why this is a microvascular disease that delivers oxygen and nutrients to skeletal muscle and other organs, right? We know that when we have a capillary system, we can have an arterial side where the oxygenated blood is being driven through, right, from the heart, and that's why this is red. And then when the blood comes through the capillary beds here, the blood cells basically line up in a single file line, and the pressure is very slow, or it's very low in capillaries, right? So why do the blood cells line up in a single file line? Because it slows the red blood cells down so that they can drop off O2, right? So they're trying to deliver the oxygen. So by slowing the red blood cells down, by making them get in a single file line, that slows down their rate of movement so that they can drop off whatever cargo they have, or if there's any solutes floating in the blood, such as glucose or electrolytes, those things can be dropped off as well. And then when the red blood cells leave, after they drop off the oxygen, right, then they move through the venous side of the capillary bed, and now you have these red blood cells that are unoxygenated or deoxygenated, but they're carrying back CO2, right? So O2 is delivered and CO2 is kind of given back to the red blood cells. And then the red blood cells go back to the heart, and then they become reoxygenated, and they can come back and deliver more goods here. So when we get down here, pressure is very low. And if pressure changes and it becomes higher, these capillaries will burst and they'll break, because capillaries are very, very weak. Capillaries are only made and formed by single endothelial cells that are bound together, right? They're not very strong, right? So you just have these single, small little endothelial cells that basically make up all of the capillaries. And the space between these cells, I'm drawing these spaces here, are very weak, right? So there's small little gaps between these cells. They're very weak. So if we have an increase in pressure, what's going to happen is that these endothelial cells right here, they're going to separate. They're going to break apart. They're going to go in different directions. And then what happens is you have the blood that's traveling through here. It gets spilled out into the interstitial space, and then we get something called edema. So if this happens in your legs, you might get some swelling in your legs. If this happens in your kidney, you're going to have major issues with regulating blood. If these capillaries in your eye burst, because your eye capillaries are very sensitive to pressure changes, you're going to basically get glaucoma, or you're going to get retinopathy, where you're going to have blindness. And this is caused by fat in the blood and sugar in the blood and changes in blood pressure because of the presence of fat in the blood. Okay, so this is really nasty stuff here. I'm going to clean this up for you guys. Okay, so, and I have to clean this after every slide, because if I don't do it when I upload your slide to Canvas, all my horrible second grader drawings will be on there. So, all right, let's move on. So, let's talk a little bit about where this cholesterol is. You can look at this on your own. I'm just trying to set you up for your presentations that you're doing here. So monosaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated, and trans fats. So the diet, right, the type of fat we have in the diet will have an impact on LDL and HDL. So if we look at monounsaturated fats, you're like, well, I don't know what that is. Well, that's the fat that's in olive oil, canola oil, peanut oil, cashews, almonds, peanuts, and so forth. Look at this. It lowers the bad cholesterol and raises the good cholesterol, right? So if you're thinking about diet and exercise, this is how you're going to change blood profile levels, or blood profile concentrations. If we look at polyunsaturated fats, again, corn, soybeans, saffron, cottonseed, fish, this again lowers LDL, the one that causes atherosclerosis and coronary heart disease, and it raises the one that is good, high density lipoproteins. Now, when we get into the animal fats and the animal proteins, you can see it's completely different. Whole milk, butter, cheese, even coconuts and coconut oil raises both LDL and HDL. So these are the types of oils, or these types of lipids, or types of fats that are going to have an adverse impact. And same with trans fats. Trans fats are made in a laboratory. They do not exist in the wild or in nature, and they raise LDL. So this is just to kind of give you the dietary components. Now, the hyperlipidemia it can be a result of multiple insults occurring at a single time. Okay, so blood lipids and blood lipoprotein concentrations and triglycerides, all these things can be adversely impacted by other things that are happening in the body at the same time. So let's talk about that.
So, sorry about that. The microphone is acting a little weird right now, so I'm not sure if you guys are picking up the right microphone here. So something to keep in mind before we move on is that this hyperlipidemia, it's a result of multiple insults happening at one time. So I just want you to keep in mind that before we move into like the signs and the symptoms. So when you're dealing with people who might be coming to work out with you that have diabetes or hyperlipidemia, some of them may have signs, some of them don't have signs. So most people don't have symptoms when it comes to high cholesterol unless unless they've had high cholesterol for a long period of time, they have cardiovascular disease, or they have medications that they're taking to lower their cholesterol. So there's a lot of things you got to keep in mind. People that have genetic issues, though, they might have very different signs, and they might present different signs that are associated with high cholesterol and hyperlipidemia because it's a genetic issue. So they might have been dealing with this for a much longer time in their life than somebody that has just started eating poorly and basically started developing this issue later in life versus somebody that had the genetic complication where they've, maybe had this issue since they've been a child. So you have to keep that kind of in mind as well. But generally, for most people, it doesn't present any outward symptoms or signs. So this is areas where when you present the PAR-Q or you do the medical history, you will be able to basically ask these people if they have any history of high cholesterol in their family, or when you're asking about their diet and you're asking about their lifestyle, if they exercise or not, you'll be able to tell that, okay, they might be at risk for cholesterol based upon the information that I have for high cholesterol. So basically some symptoms are chest pains, which we call angina, shortness of breath, heart attack. Obviously, that's a pretty big one. You'll see that this is very similar to what we saw in our cardiac issues lectures. So again, some of the things you should be noticing here is that, wow, these are all very similar signs and symptoms. They're very similar pathologies, and wow, they're really all associated with each other. That's one of the things you should be taking away from this course, is that every one of these diseases like overlap one another, and the presence of one might induce the presence of another, right? So that's what I meant by there's multiple insults that are occurring at one time. So instead of signs and symptoms, because these aren't always very apparent, we got to understand that there are certain levels of the blood, there are certain concentrations of these things in the blood that indicate that somebody might be heading towards the direction of hyperlipidemia or may have hypertension as a result of hyperlipidemia and cholesterol. So this one's a bit more complicated because sometimes we have to have blood samples to determine just where they are on this continuum. And there's a bunch of different forms. So this is why blood tests are really helpful. So here I have some definitions for you, and they're pretty self-explanatory, right? Hyperlipidemia indicates elevated blood triglycerols and cholesterols, right? That makes sense. Hypertriglyceridemia is only referring to triglycerides, not cholesterol, all right? Hypercholesterolemia refers only to cholesterol, but not triglycerides, right? So you can have hyperlipidemia, which is both, hypertriglyceridemia, which is only the triglycerides, hypercholesterolemia, which is only the cholesterol component, or you can have hyperlipoproteinemia or dysproteinemia. Now, what this means is that let me go back, let me just pull this up here. There's something going on with the concentrations of these. You could have generally, just as a very general statement, vegans have very low levels of cholesterol and VLDL and HDL. So this would be dysproteinemia. Because they're not eating a lot of cholesterol, they're not eating a lot of fats that require LDL and HDL to be mobilized in high concentrations. Where people that are obese or people that are on a Western diet and are very inactive, they're going to have hyperlipoproteinemia, which is going to be an overexpression of these things in the blood. Okay, so that's all very simple stuff there. You can read this. I don't have to read that to you. What I do want to tell you is that coronary artery disease is very, very strongly associated with the consumption of saturated fats and elevations of LDL, because the more LDL that is circulating and the more plaque that is forming in the blood vessels, the more likely that LDL is going to be oxidized and help kind of create let me just draw it one more time for you guys. And we could go into the physiology of this, right? But this isn't the type of class for that. There's your blood vessel. As we get more triglycerides and we get more lipids and we get more LDL, we start to build this nasty yellow plaque. And we get the blood cells that start to get clotted here. And then the LDL, basically, those low density lipoproteins, they can become oxidized and basically start causing a inflammatory response in this same area. And what happens then is the inflammation. Let me draw another vein here, or artery, or whatever this is. What happens is when this all occurs, right, we have the thrombosis, we have the blood clotting, right? We have the plaque formation. We have LDLs becoming oxidized, right? I'm just going to put LDL right down here so that it stays in your mind. It becomes oxidized. All of this is going to cause an inflammatory response. And let me just do something fun and cool here. I'm just going to draw a flame, right? That's a fire, right? And it's probably going to have some red in there. Okay, flame. Inflammation happens. And then when inflammation happens and you have these neutrophils and these leukocytes and these phagocytes and these helper T cells and these B cells constantly coming to help here, what happens is they start to build and destroy all the tissue that's here, and they start to make this plaque issue even worse, right? So now the plaque gets bigger because it gets trapped under all of the new tissue that the inflammation is trying to create to stop the inflammatory response. And look what happens here. Let's go back to black because you can see that. The plaque gets so big. And it's not just the plaque. Inside of this plaque is dead neutrophils, dead macrophages. The inflammation is trying to build new endothelial cells here, right? Because it's trying to repair the endothelial cell wall. And what happens is you have different fibers being created here. And what happens is it traps this plaque inside, and now you have full occlusion of the vascular system, and all these red blood cells just basically get trapped here. And then what happens is you generally have a heart attack. But this plaque could also break off and clog other areas. So yeah, this is the result of your cholesterol, your triglycerides, and your fatty acids. So now when we're talking about exercise, generally exercise is not impacted by dyslipidemia unless somebody has coronary artery disease. Now, one of the things that is favorable and helps us with cholesterol and exercising is the use of statins. So a lot of Americans are using statins right now, which are cholesterol lowering medications. And essentially what they do, let's go back here. I told you that your liver produces its own cholesterol, right? So this is what's really messed up about the pharmaceutical industries. This is how diabolical they can be sometimes. And I only say sometimes because a lot of the products they make help sustain life. But I told you that your liver synthesizes its own cholesterol. So what happens with statins, when you take this drug, is the statins basically tell your hepatocytes, it's a toxin that's delivered to your hepatocytes. So these are your cells in your liver, hepatocytes. And it basically delivers a toxin to these hepatocytes, which stops them from producing your own cholesterol. So now you don't have the mixture of dietary cholesterol with endogenous liver-produced cholesterol, which will lower your overall cholesterol. So instead of the medical industry saying, hey, just eat better, exercise more, eat more plants, they say, hey, eat whatever the hell you want. We'll deliver this toxin to shut off the synthesis of cholesterol in your body so that we can kind of control some of these things and hopefully increase some of this. So that's how this medication works. It's really just kind of disgusting that people just can't diet and exercise because exercise is medicine. We can have the same impact just by simply exercising and eating some things that are green and grow on trees. So generally, there's really not a major concern with exercising people with dyslipidemia or hyperlipidemia. unless they have a pre-existing condition such as coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease. So when they have this disease, this process will alter the exercise response, which basically means that we have to be way more tuned in to what they're doing. And they may have more limitations on exercise because of the disease, or if they had maybe a stent put in their heart, or they had a bypass surgery. So that complicates things even more. So people with high lipid concentrations in their blood may be faced with inadequate, that should be together, inadequate oxygen supplies or delivery to the muscles. So that is one of the things we have to worry about. So we would, if somebody had hyperlipidemia or dyslipidemia, we would see on a metabolic cart when we're doing the VO2 max test that they might have poor oxygen saturation. They might have poor VO2 scores. So that's something we could look at when we are doing an assessment. But because of their medications that they take, they're generally able to exercise and participate in normal exercise because the medication helps kind of curb the disadvantageous adaptations that are happening. So the effects of exercise training, this is why we want to exercise these individuals. We can favorably alter their lipid profiles. I kind of showed you that earlier on. We can reduce triglyceride concentrations, and we can increase HDL concentrations. This is really good. We want those to be low with triglycerides and high with the high-density lipoproteins. And we can also favorably increase the enzymatic activity that helps with the metabolism of both triglycerides, LDLs, and HDLs. So if the enzymes are working faster, especially in the liver, right? Because one of the things you get when you take a metabolism test at a hospital or with your doctors, they want to measure your liver enzymes. Some enzymes we want to be higher, some we want to be lower. And it just kind of depends on the jobs that they are doing. So we favorably alter the enzymes that are going to help kind of regulate this process a little more. So that is what exercise training will do. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that with any exercise training program, we also want to have the dietary component. But when we're dealing with people with diabetes and hyperlipidemia, it's even more important to kind of implement that dietary piece, which is why I put this here. This is very basic, but it's just a way to show you that diet also has an impact on those lipoproteins. So diet and exercise in tandem will have very favorable effects on this condition. Okay, so now we're getting into where we're going to change our approach in this course. So, many of you have had exercise kinesiology 456A. Some of you are taking it right now. So here's where we're going to kind of do a crossover and make sure that we understand some of the concepts that we have spoken about in 456A, and I'm going to let you do a little bit of research, and I'm going to give you plenty of time to do this, so please don't feel overwhelmed at the moment. So when we do exercise testing with people with this condition, we can do a cycle ergometer, or we can do a treadmill test. Now, here's what I want you to pay attention to, because here is where you are going to have to do a little bit of work. There are multiple ramp protocols, and if you were in 456A, you know to look in chapter 3 and 4 of our textbook, which is Advanced Fitness Assessment and Exercise Prescription. If you had already taken 456A, you have that textbook. So if you look in chapters 3 and 4, it talks all about ramp protocols, which are both maximal. Hey, I'm getting pretty good at writing with my right hand. And submaximal, right? Well, I'm going to say that in this course, I'm going to say submax. Because of the population of people we're working with, whenever we do an assessment, we're going to do a submax assessment, or we can even do calculations. We don't even have to put them on a device or a machine to do a VO2 assessment. We can just basically do a calculation to predict their VO2. Now, while you and your partners are preparing to give me this presentation, and I will have the details of that presentation given to you early next week, and I'm going to give you the entire week to just kind of work on this and solidify it and get ready to make your videos for me. I will tell you everything that this test is going to contain. I'm in last week 10's module, and this week I am purposely pushing you in a certain direction to prepare you for the questions I'm going to ask you for your presentation. Okay, so it is coming. Right now, just focus on the science and focus on these tasks. I want you to figure out what ramp protocol you would use for somebody with diabetes and somebody with dyslipidemia or hyperlipidemia. It's going to be the same test, okay? Understand this watts component. You should know what watts are now, right? Watts are a way that we measure energy expenditure and how much intensity somebody is going to be doing on a test, okay? So when we're on a cycle ergometer, the watts can be a little bit higher simply because it's a non-load bearing test, right? So we can do a ramp protocol, or we could do a staged protocol. And this staged protocol is 25 to 50 watts for 3-minute stages, right? So what does that mean? That means that we're going to basically every 3 minutes increase the intensity somehow, right? And that intensity could be the wattage, right? We could do 20 at stage 1, 25 at stage 2, 30 at stage 3, 35 at stage 4, right? Now this would be on a cycle ergometer, so we'd have to adjust the flywheel a little bit to increase that intensity. So that would be an example of what a staged or ramp protocol is. And you guys, I am going to give you all the freedom you want to kind of explore this. This is where I'm going to be focusing on how well you can do some research, because this is your research component. This is why I'm telling you that the wheels are coming off. If I were presenting this thing to you and you're like, I have no idea what that is. Well, if this were the job place, or you were doing your master's, or you're doing your PhD, and you said, I don't know what that is, and your professors aren't there to explain it to you, you have to be able to figure it out. Or they'll hire somebody that will figure it out. Or they'll bring in somebody into their lab, if you're doing a master's program, that will figure it out. Or they'll give the scholarship to the student that can figure it out, and they'll make you pay for your master's program, right? So that's why I'm doing this. I need you guys to do a little bit of the road work now. So I need you to kind of figure out what are some cycle and some treadmill protocols that we could use for submaximal measurements of VO2, right? That's what we're looking at here. What are their VO2 levels? Okay, and why do we care what their VO2 levels are? Well, because if we are going to put somebody through exercise programming, we need to know where they start at, right? What is their VO2 when they start? Well, their VO2 is, let's say, since they have diabetes, let's say they're at, let's give them a low score, 27 ml. Oh, that's hard to write with my right hand for some reason. K per kilogram of body weight per minute. Okay, so when they start with us, we have to assess them to say, okay, well, this is where they were when they started. And then we design our program. What are we going to do with them? Are we going to do cardio? Are we going to do strength training? Are we going to do cardio and strength training? Sorry, I just said strength training and program because I'm writing and speaking at the same time. You know what? I can't do this. Let me fix this for you guys, because this is looking like a damn ransom letter. Like I just kidnapped somebody's kid and I'm telling them how much money I want. So let's do insert. Let's make this prettier for you guys. Okay, so let's say we started, right? We start we bring in a client. We're working at a hospital. We're working at a gym, right? We're a clinical physiologist at a hospital. And we do their first assessment, and they're 27 milligrams. Doesn't that look so much prettier? Per kilogram, sorry, milliliters per kilogram per minute, right? That's what their VO2 score was when they came to us. We did our assessment. We did our medical history. We did our PAR-Q. We did our algorithm for ACSM to determine whether or not they can work out right away or whether or not they need to go see a physician, right? So we determined all that, and then we did a assessment. We did some type of oxygen consumption assessment, and we basically found out that they were at this. Then we're going to program, right? And what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to figure out what we're going to do with these people with exercise. Are we going to do the weight training? Are we going to do the cardiac training? Are we going to do a combination? Are we going to do concurrent training? Are we going to do agility ladders? Are we going to do power training? Are we going to do speed training? How are we going to take our training and make this better? Because remember, when we're dealing with people who are at risk, the higher this score is, the lower the risk is for cardiovascular disease and other sort of diseases, okay? The lower this score is, the higher risk you are. So 27 is a pretty low score. So that makes sense. If you have a low score, you're at a higher risk for things like coronary heart disease, congenital heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hyperlipidemia, AFib, all these things that we've been talking about. So we want to get this score up. So we're going to program some exercises. Now, does this exercise only consist of cardiovascular exercises, or does it consist of combination of exercises? And that's where you're going to do your other research component, right? So you need to, let's make this much prettier for you guys. Where's the shape? Boop. There you go. You need to do some lifting, pun intended, on this component here. You have to be able to know where to go and how to find it. And you guys have team members, right? So use your resources. You need to know if you decide to do a treadmill test instead of a cycle ergometer test, you would want to do 1 to 2 METs. And if you know what 1 MET is equivalent to 3.5 liters of oxygen consumed per minute, which is what we consume at rest. 1 MET is very low. So look at the differences between METs on the cycle versus the treadmill, right? Because this is more risky, right? And 2 METs is like, if you guys looked at that chart I gave you, I think sex was 2 METs. So unless you're just an absolute monster in the bed and you're like burning off like 12 METs in the bedroom, which is highly unlikely, think about how rigorous sexual activities can be, because that's 2 METs. So this is not very high at all right? So you need to figure out what ramp protocol you would want to use if you're doing the cycle ergometer. You need to figure out what protocol you want to do if you're doing a treadmill. And then you need to tell me why you chose that. I'm looking for rationale in this entire project, all right? What we would want to measure on this is, of course, the EKG. We want to see what the heart's doing, especially when we're dealing with people with hyperlipidemia, because if they don't present anything, any symptoms or signs while you're working out with them, you will see abnormalities here in your ECG. Remember I told you that people with high cholesterol, they don't really show us any indications of illness. You will see it here. You will see that the heart is working harder for a specific reason, okay? So if you were doing this test, and you had an ECG, you and your partners need to tell me what that would look like. So remember all those waves I taught you about. Would the waves, let me see if I can get a pen here, would the waves look normal? Or would there be some weird sort of inversions with these waves? And that's something that you guys are going to basically present for me on your presentation. What would that look like? Now, obviously, we're not putting ECG cables up to anybody, but based upon our previous conversations, you should know where some of these inversions, hint, hint, wink, wink, I hope you see that right there, where some of these inversions occur. And you should be able to draw me what somebody with this condition, what their ECG would look like. Other blood pressures. So if you're doing this presentation on your video and you have a whiteboard or you have your iPad, when you address this part, you would say that, oh, well, this ECG reading looked like this, right? Because of their condition. And if you did that, I would fail you because no ECG looks like that. But I'm just saying that you can demonstrate theoretically what that would look like. We would want to take blood pressure and heart rate, of course, because we're dealing with people that are going to have hearts that are working much harder. And we would want to use a Borg's rate of perceived exertion between 6 and 20. And just think about, where would these people be? What is 1 to 2 METs on your rate of perceived exertion? So that's something that you can think about. Endpoints, VO2 peak. If they hit their VO2 peak, we stop it. If you don't know what a VO2 peak is, if you haven't done 456 in a while, look it up. This is where you're doing some of the heavy lifting. If we get serious dysrhythmias, we've already talked about that. You should know what that is. If there's any sort of changes in these waves, what would that look like? If their systolic blood pressure goes above 250, right? So these are things we've seen again and again and again and again. And then also, if you wanted to do an endurance test, you would do a 6-minute walk test. Now, this is going to be one of the major parts of this presentation. This is, again, where you do some of the heavy lifting. You are going to tell me how you would do a 6-minute walk test. And I'm telling you, there are so many resources online for this test. I've taught this test for the last 13 years. You're going to tell me how you would conduct it. You're going to tell me how they would score and what it means. Okay? So there's an assessment piece to this entire exam that you're going to present to me. Now, the other piece to this exam is going to be the programming piece. All right? This is going to be true for both for diabetes and hyperlipidemia. Sorry, I've been talking for a while. You guys are going to tell me what you would do. Now, keep in mind, this is very important. This component only talks about aerobic activity. Type 2 diabetes talked about strength training as well. So these are the goals you're going to try to get when you work with these people, right? Here's your fit principle, right? Frequency, intensity, duration, right? So here's where you want to be. 40 to 70% of peak work rate. Rate of perceived exertion, 11 to 16 out of 20. 40 to 60 minute sessions, 2 sessions per day, or two sessions a day for 20 to 30 minutes, right? Emphasize duration rather than intensity, all right? So here is where you're going to, and I'm going to send this to you. You're going to use ACSM. See, what I'm doing here is I'm making you put all this together. I have been giving you guys lots of puzzle pieces. Recommendations. Let me fix that typing. I have given you guys a lot of puzzle pieces here, and now I want you to put it all together, right? This is like a practical, but we're not in the lab. So the other part of this exam is you're going to take these recommendations and you're going to tell me what the intensity, the frequency, and the duration would be, and you're going to tell me why. And then you're going to tell me if you would also incorporate strength training. So with this programming part, you're going to basically show me, and I will specify this in the details, what a, let's say, 4 to 6 week training program would look like that would include aerobic fitness and include strength training or any other type of training, right? If you think it's necessary. Now, in the diabetes one, it was necessary. Here, they don't talk about it. So I am giving you the freedom to design and assess to basically help these people get this score higher. All right. Now, like I said, I will give you all the details. You get all the freedom to design this. And there will be one more component to this, but I'm just trying to get you off in the right start right now without overwhelming you. So that's, we'll talk about that when I get you the details out. So some other things to think about is I just wanted to add one more thing here. I told you earlier that there are multiple insults that are happening at one time here. And these are some things for you to think about, because when I give you this scenario of somebody you're going to work out and design a program for, I want you to be aware of these values as well. So this condition of diabetes and hyperlipidemia, there's this clustering of components. So I told you earlier, we have hypertension, we have hypertriglyceridemia, we have low high density lipoproteins, which are really good for us. We have obesity. We also have impaired glucose handling, right? You don't need to worry about albumin. We're not going to talk about that. So these things are all happening at one time, which is going to change the physiology. So some things to think about is blood pressure. Somebody that has hyperlipidemia is going to be in this range of blood pressure. So if I said to you, you have a person coming in that wants to work out with you, and you're working at a hospital as an exercise physiologist, this is their resting blood pressure. You would be able to say, oh, wow, that's high and that's high. Systolic is high and diastolic is high. They're stage 1 hypertension. Is that something that you need to consider? Yes, it is. And then I'll say, does this person need to see a doctor, or are they okay to work out without a doctor's permission? So that goes back to that ACSM algorithm that we talked about in chapter 1. So you need to be aware of these things, because I'm going to give you guys a scenario, and that scenario is basically going to give you the symptoms or the diagnosis of this person, right? You need to be aware of blood lipid profiles or blood lipid chemistry. So total cholesterol, when we get above 239, we're at a really high dangerous place. Here's optimal, right? LDL, look at anything above 159. So I'm going to give you some values. So just kind of look at this and say, okay, where is Mr. Blackburn putting this person on this continuum? Again, if we have somebody that is in bad shape, they're going to have, can I draw on that? And you let me draw. I want to draw. Okay, there we go. They're going to have high total cholesterol, high LDL, and they're going to have low HDL. So that's, in this case, is going to be less than 40. We want HDL to be higher. So just kind of keep in mind these values and just kind of see where I place this person here. Because I'm going to ask you questions like, hey, you have a person coming to the hospital. They're on cholesterol medication. And their cholesterol medication they've been on for 6 months, and their total cholesterol is 239. You're going to be like, well, that doesn't make sense because they're on cholesterol medication. So what's going on here? That's where you should say they need to see a doctor, because they're on medication and their cholesterol here. And then I say to you, not only is their cholesterol 239, but their blood pressure is systolic 159, diastolic 99. And you say, okay, well, the cholesterol medication should be lowering the cholesterol and lowering the lipids, but it's not. And it should also be lowering blood pressure, but it's not. I can't put this person through an exercise program, nor can I assess them until they see their doctor and they get clearance, right? So that's what I'm trying to do here. And then also blood glucose. I told you that obesity and impaired glucose handling is a part of this clustering. So if you look here, there's 2 ways that we determine if somebody has elevated blood glucose. when a complication is present, and that is through HbA1c, which is a protein in the blood that gets glycated by glucose. So when you have a protein in the blood, and then you have these glucose molecules just kind of binding to it and just being carried around with this protein, this is glucose just kind of hanging off, we can measure this in the blood, and that gives us an indication of how long blood has been elevated, because usually albumin in the blood only has a life of 3 months, and then you have basically a turnover of albumin in the blood. So this gives us like an indication of what blood chemistry has looked like, or glucose chemistry has looked like, for about 3 months. So anything above 6 for HbA1c is getting into this elevated thing. And with type 2 diabetics that I've worked with, I've seen 13 and above. So 13 and above, this is funny, suicidal, because it's 100% preventable. I thought that was cute. 13 is tremendously high, which means they have very uncontrolled blood glucose. And you can see here that normal glucose should be anywhere between 68 and 100 milligrams per deciliter. And as we get higher HbA1c, we also get higher blood glucose levels. So anything above here gets really, really dangerous. And you can see here that there's these cute little sayings here. So just familiarize yourself with this so that when I tell you this scenario, you guys can basically kind of navigate your way through this. Okay, so I am going to get you guys all the details you need for your third exam. I've given you kind of a preview of what that's going to look like. And I will be in touch. Take care.